Hey everyone, welcome back. Voruna is a very interesting frame. She does very many things, yet at the same time, not a lot of things. Basically, she is a sandbox frame. Her kit allows you a lot of different playstyles, however, it is basically impossible to get the most out of her entire kit at once for any given single playstyle. It leads to a weird situation where parts of her kit are redundant on certain loadouts no matter how hard you try. On top of this, she has a couple of genuine issues, namely her 4, but there is more. However, she isn't a bad frame, rather she is actually a good frame, but only in the strictest sense. In fact, there are quite a few powerful loadouts for her. I'm going to be showing you several of them today, but some are similar in build even though they'll play out quite differently. A diversity of different playstyles is what keeps a frame fun, and this is what allows you to quote-unquote personalize a frame. But where she falls short also includes number issues. Let's take a closer look at what's going on. Her passive allows her to use one of the 4 hounds on her for unique perks by holding down an ability key. 1 gives her parkour buffs, 2 gives her status immunity, 3 gives her heavy efficiency, 4 gives her a second life. There are good and bad things about her passive. The biggest boon is it being freely interchangeable in a mission. Example, let's say you're on a mash melee spam build with status immunity active. The Acolyte spawns in, you're at a 12x combo. You can switch your passive to heavy attack efficiency, kill the Acolyte with a single heavy attack, and switch back to status immunity like nothing happened and keep your 12x combo. This is basically her biggest advantage on her passive, being able to dynamically adapt to your needs. However, it is not all roses and pretty colors. Switching back to your status immunity passive will not wipe currently active status effects on Voruna. Also, her 4th passive that grants you an extra life when you go down goes on a 60-second cooldown when it is consumed. Cool, that makes sense as advertised, but what it doesn't tell you is, if you forcefully swap off her 4th passive without consuming the extra life, it still goes on a 60-second cooldown. Yes, even if you didn't use it. I would say her 2nd and 3rd passives will see the most use between normal melee spam and heavy attack builds, whereas her 1 will be handy for zooming around on short missions or on open world memes. Also, her 3rd passive gives you 100% heavy efficiency, but it actually doesn't, because the 90% cap still applies, so you still lose 10% when you heavy attack. But the overcap is in fact still there, so if you have a negative heavy efficiency Riven, that 10% spare overcap might help a bit. Sorry to burst your bubble, her passive does not give a true uncapped 100% heavy efficiency. How about her actual abilities? Shroud of Dynar, her 1 is quite simple, yet it's not. You cast it, you go invisible for the listed duration. You use any of your weapons at all, regardless of if they are silenced, you lose the invisibility permanently until you recast your 1 again. It gives a 200% speed buff that is unaffected by strength and has this 3 to 8 second buff duration on the bottom. This is the duration of the crit and status buff you get from hitting an enemy with your melee while invisible. Both the crit and status buffs are flat, meaning the crit multiplier is added directly onto your final CD. So at 100 strength, a weapon with modded 5 CD becomes 7 CD with Dynar active. The status chance is literally just plus 100% total, so you basically get 1 extra status proc per swing. This is very handy on weapons with shit status, but the biggest part is every single melee will force proc slash on every single hit when your 1 is active. So even a melee that can never slash is now viable, and arguably top tier. Use whatever melee you want, everything becomes good. However, you see this 8 on the bottom. It only gains 3 seconds extension per 100% duration you add. And this is the duration of the buff that activates when your melee swing that comes out of invisibility kills the enemy. Her 2 is basically a single target primer, but when they die, it acts like a mecha set and spreads all existing statuses in an AoE. You can actually use this ability in two ways, either prime and nuke the enemy to then nuke everything within range, or you can spam kill stuff with her too, and everything else around them dies, but it requires armor strip. It's pretty much a Gamba ability with varying results. For ability DPS, you pray you get slash, gas, heat, or electric, but as a primer tool you can just chuck it on top of everything else you normally prime with. It applies 10 stacks of whatever status types it inflicts, and that's it. But this is actually her strongest ability on her kit. Her 3 is an infinite energy fountain on a melee build. Every single melee kill will drop health orbs, and headshot kills drop energy orbs. Kill an enemy with a melee headshot, it drops both. Killing anything affected by 5 or more status effects will add duration to this ability. As long as you keep DPSing, you only have to cast this ability once at the start of the mission, and it basically never wears off. Her 4 is problematic. It is not a weapon, it is not a pseudo-exalt, and obviously it isn't an exalt. It is not affected by elemental buffs, arcane buffs, or literally anything except viral and roar. The AoE bleeds are not true slash procs and are actually created as a true damage aura on the ground. They do not double dip roar, whereas the main hit does. This also means there are no slash procs in the AoE to scale with Sickening Pulse or any other status shenanigans. The AoE true damage is garbage and cannot kill on Steel Path. The only way to AoE kill is propagate the main target hit that inflicted the big slash proc. This can be done with Mark for Death or Mecha set. Unfortunately, the true damage floor aura hits before the actual big slash hit, meaning Mark for Death will propagate the shitty small true damage AoE instead of the big hit. It is impossible for Mark for Death to transfer the big hit unless DE changes the order of damage instances for this ability. Otherwise, you could have done a big AoE slash on demand. Missed potential. Knowing this, let's look at those juicy Voruna builds. The first has a Helminth variation, but all are modded the same. They each have a different melee playstyle, and these include subsuming either Terrify, Nourish, or Ensnare over her 4. Why her 4? Because we established it sucks. Your 3 lets you spam abilities, your 1 makes your melee strong, and your 2 is good for priming the crap out of acolytes, demlists, whatever. A single Tauforge Azure Archon shard for max energy is strongly recommended for this build because their energy pool is very small. On a melee focused build with a ton of health orb generation, we're gonna run Combat Discipline with Arcane Avenger today. The aura inflicts self damage on kills, which is eligible to proc our Arcane for a flat plus 45% crit buff. Our survival today on this build comes from shield gating. Voruna only has 300 shields, 75 with the Decay Dragon key. At 100 efficiency, casting Terrify restores all our shields with our 3 Augur mods we have today for 120% shield to energy conversion, with the other 2 being on our pistol. Because it is both our survival and blender tool, we've slotted Creeping Terrify for 80% slow. If you're using Nourish or Ensnare, this is a free slot to run whatever you want. Melee spam builds don't have a lot of range compared to AoE launchers and AoE ability nukes. You need time to cover the range you armor stripped, time that Creeping Terrify gives you before they run off. We run 190 range because too little range makes you spam Terrify more and reduces the amount of time spent swinging your melee, which means less KPM. Otherwise, well, for Nourish it gives you a better reflect range to stun enemies and inflict 10 viral stacks, and for Ensnare, well, bigger grab range. Your 3 is a joke, just activate it once at the start and go to town killing stuff. When an Acolyte or a Demolist or whatever spawns, you can cast your 2 on them, then cast your 1 and whack them with a massive crit and status buff to one-shot them. As mentioned earlier, you can even swap your passive to heavy efficiency for this exact moment before switching back to status immunity. If you're running Ensnare or Nourish instead, I would actually recommend running a rank 4 Blind Rage instead of Umbral Intensify. This lowers your efficiency enough that recasting Nourish or Ensnare will restore exactly 75 shields for shield gating. Rolling Guard is still there in a pinch to help shield gate and also to deal with those status effects if you swapped off for second passive, since switching back to status immunity does not have a cleanse on currently active procs. Equilibrium is obvious. Arcane Strike is interchangeable with whatever you want. Use whatever primer you want. I would strongly recommend bringing one that produces at least 5 different status effects if you don't want to be stuck spamming your 2 often. An epitaph on a traditional build inflicts force cold procs. It also has a natural blast typing, and I've modded this one with extra viral and radiation to crowd control and buff damage. If any IPS triggers, that's 5 procs needed to activate your 3's extended duration. If you bring an impact or magnetic nucor, you get the progenitor, innate radiation, modded viral and heat, and the microwave effect for 5 total. This way you can easily keep adding duration to your 3 when you land your melee kills, which caps out at 1 minute. Use whatever melee you want. I'm using a Praetos today with this pure viral build since I'm using Terrify. If you're using Ensnare, you can use a traditional slash build like this, and if you're on Nourish, well, you can use whatever element you want. Your 1 on a Nourish setup gives you the force / proc to deal with armored units when your whatever build can't kill them. This is a problem that the Terrify and Ensnare builds don't have because Nourish heavily skews your weapon's weight towards viral, unless the stance offers enough force / procs. One special case is Arca Titron, which has horrible attack speed, but by casting a 1 before ground slamming with stacks, you ensure the hammer has a ton of bonus crit damage and plus 100% flat status when you try to get kills against full stripped enemies to build capacitor stacks effortlessly. I use this particular Arca Titron build that can triple slot attack speed for this purpose, but feel free to mess around with it. The focus school on this loadout doesn't really matter, but I'm used to running Mana Rye for sling strength. This grants plus 40% strength for bigger crit and status from her 1. Power transfer from Mana Rye also grants plus 50% cast speed, and the companion on this build is also mostly irrelevant since Voruna generates all of her own energy she needs here and you are free to prime with a pistol. Realistically, this particular panzer only serves to save you with Martyr if you screw up and give itself infinite cav lives with Devolution, Radar, and Vacuum. Seriously, use whatever you want here. The other build variant today revolves around DPSing with her 2. This is for those of you who really wanted a way to channel her inner Lycan. Her 2 hits through walls. She doesn't do enough damage with her 2 unless you armor strip. There's only one armor strip that hits through walls. No, I'm not using Terrify because easy choice, it's literally the only Helminth that lets her to kill things as a DPS ability. The statuses do not propagate until the original target of your 2 dies, and the AoE will not kill enemies unless they are armor stripped because the damage scaling is the same as the original target. There is some bonus scaling from gas or electric procs, but it isn't strong enough for her 2 to overcome armor. In fact, this entire setup revolves around spamming her 2 as much as possible. This also causes some massive energy issues, so I would strongly recommend running at least 1 energy max Azure Archon shard. You basically cycle through the majority of your energy pool for a single DPS rotation and then refund it all at the end. I would also recommend at least 1 casting speed shard because of how much you spam your 2, and even though it's a quick cast, the faster you kill the main target, the faster you can move on to the next area. I'm just gonna go out and say this build works slightly better with the Mecha set, but I don't really like running it. If you did, you'd just swap out Brief for Spite and Augur Secrets out for Mecha Empowered and Mecha Pulse. Killing stuff in an AoE with your 2 will eventually tank the Mecha marked enemy after a few seconds, and killing them will further expand your second ability's DPS by 30 meter radius. If you want to run that version, you will also have to bring a Kubro. This particular Predasite build worked well enough for me, and I'm gonna be honest and say I haven't really looked at this Predasite in a while as it was originally for FIX Venom. Feel free to tweak the build as you wish. I would strongly recommend using Mana Rye for cast speed here to stack with your Archon shards via power transfer. Natural kills will drop health and energy orbs, and combined with the occasional melee DPS on full stripped enemies for health orbs, equilibrium, and energy orbs proccing energize, it should not be difficult to maintain the DPS rotation on 130 efficiency. Creeping Terrify is again used to keep enemies off your back and make sure they stay put while you spam your 2. Molt Augmented is important to buff more strength since her 2 basically needs all this damage it can get. I would not recommend using this build for more than an hour of solo survival, and the melee of choice on this build is Glaive Prime. It doesn't need to be this since you're full stripping enemies, just make sure it's an actually fully built melee. Why did I choose Glaive? Because your 2 can't kill Acolytes. It can prod them for heavier hitting melees, but Glaive just doesn't care and you can detonate in their face to kill them with a couple of throws. Feel free to use this build, it's a generic 2x heavy detonate for forced / setup. Why Bane? In case a feisty Xmas thinks it can put up a fight. It double dips for 2.4 times more damage on the / bleeds. We use the same primer setups from earlier, however this time I would recommend bringing an epitaph to prime as much enemies in an area as possible, in case your 2 spam somehow fails to proc viral properly and they die early. Companion is also relevant like before, but you can also use the same Panzer build from earlier too, as I mentioned, to keep yourself alive with a Martyr, your cat alive with Devolution, and a Radar with a Vacuum. The final build is for open world memes or just zooming through tiles. I would strongly advise bringing a proper melee of whatever you want to funnel into your 3, since the efficiency sucks on this build. Realistically, you just hit stuff in the head to activate Consequence for bonus parkour, Eruption knocks things down around you as you pick up orbs, and we went all in on duration and strength. While her once 200% speed buff does not scale, Infested Mobility does. Speed Drift for some bonus cast speed alongside Sprint, and basically every notable sprint, strength, and duration mod I could fit. You zoom pretty fast with this, and it's pretty fun to mess around with. Cutting Drift is just there for the slide and friction. Feel free to use whatever you want, like I said. The last part of this video is about what can be fixed about Voruna. It's honestly pretty simple. Make her 4 actually inflict real slash procs and not this weird true damage aura when you hit an enemy with your 4. Also, make your 4 hit enemies first before the true damage aura hits so that her 4 is actually compatible with Marked for Death. This would mean it propagates the main big hit instead of the tiny small true damage aura it currently does. Real slash procs on the AoE also means you could use Expedite Suffering, or if this idea is rejected, just buff the actual damage on her 4's AoE to be relevant on Steel Path. Currently, it literally tickles, and even against fully stripped enemies, even if I fully debuff with Viral on a 300 plus strength build, it does 50 to 60 times less damage on the AoE and still struggles to kill. Also, her 4's passive shouldn't have a 60-second cooldown if you swap off of it. It should only do that if the life is consumed. That's it. Nice and easy simple fixes for glaring issues on her kit. That's my take on Voruna today after playing her all of day 1. A couple of interesting setups, but many of them had issues and didn't make it into the video. I really hope TE gives her the buff she needs, because they usually touch up a frame at least twice before moving on, as her kit has a lot of potential. She is a good frame, but she could become much greater if the problems were addressed. Hopefully you enjoyed the builds today. Cheers! If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I've done with the Lewis Prey update. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. You won't miss out on any of that, do you? And that'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.